Okay, I have combined section 4 and 5 together because 4 is looking at how humans end up threatening biodiversity, and then 5 is looking at how we end up trying to fix those threats to biodiversity. So the loss of biodiversity has long-term effects. Some things that could end up happening is it could be like a plant or something like that that had a medical purpose, and we could lose that and different technological advances because of losing a species. So that extinction of species, you're never going to get that species back. And it's also going to cause the ecosystem to lose stability, so that ecosystem could possibly crash. So loss of habitat eliminates species. Habitat fragmentation is one of the largest threats to biodiversity. Habitat fragmentation is going to prevent an organism from having access to its entire home range. So it's breaking up where they live. A lot of times building home like different developments and things like that in nature ends up causing this habitat fragmentation. So it can occur when barriers form within habitat, and it's often caused by human development. Ways to sort of prevent this, you can do habitat corridors are a solution to the problem. So corridors can be road overpasses or underpasses, and allows the species to move in between the different areas of their habitat, like you see in the picture below there. Another thing that can threaten biodiversity is uh, introduced species or invasive species. An introduced species is one that is brought to an ecosystem by humans, and sometimes it's accidental, other times it's done on purpose. So invasive species can have a definitely a harmful effect on the environment and even cause economic impacts as well. Invasive species push out a native species. So you end up with people getting Burmese pythons as pets, and then they're like, "Oh, this is too big. I can't handle it. So I'm gonna just dump it out in the woods." And in Florida, they end up becoming a major predator and end up causing problems for other snakes that should be living in that area. Uh, Another example of an invasive species were mice in Australia. There hadn't been mice there, and they got introduced, and they run rampant. There's not many of the predators end up feeding on the mice. It doesn't always have to be animals. Here's a plant in the southeastern U.S. that ends up being an invasive species. We have them in this area, the Asian carp that you can find in the rivers. Mustard garlic is an example of a plant in this area that is an invasive species. So in section 5, like I said, we're going to look at how we can protect and restore ecosystems. So sustainable development, they're going to be ways of managing resources for present and future generations. Sustainable development meets needs without hurting future generations. In order for it to really be considered a sustainable development, nature needs to be able to do the stuff on its own. Man needs to put in very little effort for it to happen. So uh, the resources, they're going to meet current needs. Resources will still be available for future use. So bamboo is a good example of a sustainable resource. The timber industry, like I'd mentioned earlier in a previous lecture, is starting to adopt sustainable practices. Global fisheries have also adopted several of these sustainable practices, for example, rotating catches. fishing gear review, having certain requirements for the fishing gear so some fish can actually escape. Harvest reduction, setting numbers on how much of the fish they can take. And then just outright fishing bans. You can't fish this species for this current year. So conservation practices focus on a few species but benefit an entire ecosystem. The Endangered Species Act works to protect individual species from extinction. And a listed species is often called an umbrella species. So the habitat in which that species lives needs to be protected as well. So if you find a species that is endangered, wherever it's living, all of those other species in that area are also protected, is basically what this is getting at. So other species are protected because they share that ecosystem with them. So protecting Earth's resources help protect the future. The Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, was created in 1970. The EPA develops policies and regulations to protect the environment. Legislation helps to protect the environment and the endangered species. So you have the Clean Air Act, for example, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, are all things that were done by the EPA. A National Park Service helps manage public lands. The park systems include over 390 areas, averaging 84 million acres. So right there is a picture of Yosemite National Park. There are several ways that people can help protect the environment. They can control population growth, develop sustainable technology and practices, maintain ecosystems. So all of those things are things that we can do to help. So that is the end of the notes for sections 4 and 5 and the end of the notes for chapter 16.